Marco, Gentleman of the Emerald City, Book 4. Written by L.A. Witt. Narrated by Michael Ferraiuolo. Chapter 1. Julian. They actually proposed? I grabbed Blake's hands in both of mine on top of the table, nearly knocking the menus and a wine glass onto the cafe floor. Oh my God, congratulations! My best friend smiled. Thanks. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I told you I was going to marry them someday, but then all that time they said they weren't down with marriage, and now... He gently freed his left hand and held it up, showing off the platinum band. They changed their mind? Oh, that's amazing. I touched my chest. I'm so excited for both of you. So have you started planning the wedding? I want details, sister, details. Blake laughed, though there was an uncomfortable undertone. Yeah, we've started planning. He put his hand over mine and lowered his gaze. That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. Alarm tickled my senses. Oh, okay. Was he about to tell me I wasn't invited? I mean, if he didn't want me there, I'd be hurt, but it was his wedding, his decision. Maybe they wanted something small and intimate, or... Blake cleared his throat and he kept his hand on mine as he met my gaze again. I want you to be my best man. I had to laugh, mostly with relief because I'd been expecting the worst. What? Of course. Oh, good God, hon, I thought you were about to tell me you didn't want me there. Didn't want? He snorted. Please. A wedding wouldn't be a wedding without you there, and like I'd ever have anyone else as my best man. Aw, you sweetheart. But there was still something unsettling about this conversation. So, what's up then? You're not going to make me wear a 1970s throwback tux, are you? I stuck out my tongue. Blake laughed, shaking his head. I mean, I'd pay to see you in one of those, but I will cut you. He chuckled. No, we're not going that route. But there were two kinda minor details that... He hesitated, and his humor vanished. I just need you to tell me honestly if they're deal breakers. Deal breakers? Honey, unless you're hiring an ABBA cover band, I'm there. Another laugh flickered across his lips, but it was half-hearted at best, which raised even more alarm bells. Blake loved nothing more than to bombard me with covers of ABBA songs, since he knew I thought each and every one of them was sacrilege. Okay, Erasure got away with a couple, but that's it. The fact that he wasn't laughing about it now made me really curious, and nervous, about the two details that might be deal-breakers. Blake took a deep breath. Okay, so we decided to have a destination wedding. The in-laws are fucking loaded, and they thought Taylor would never get married, so they want to go all out and give us a huge wedding in Honolulu, and then take the entire wedding party on a cruise. Oh, a cruise? And Hawaii? I arched an eyebrow. Is that the deal breaker? I mean, are we going to be tossing someone into a volcano or something? He shook his head. No, but as my best man, I might need you there a couple of days early to help get things organized. Plus the cruise is like 10 days, so I didn't know if that would be an issue with work. I thought about it, then waved a hand. I'll make it happen. Just let me know when you need me to be there, and I'll be there. I paused. Hell, I'm long overdue for some vacation. I might even go over ahead of you just to fuck off on the beach for a while. That brought his smile back to life. Sort of. Okay, good. I didn't want it to be a huge imposition. Oh, no, I said with playful sarcasm. Just drag me away from my job to go to your wedding on a Hawaiian island. Oh, anything but that. He chuckled and rolled his eyes, but then sobered again. It's the other thing that I'm worried might be the actual deal-breaker. I sobered too, and I took a sip of wine. Something told me I'd need the alcohol. Blake was a worrier by nature, so he freaked out over everything, but his anxiety over this was, well, worrying. He took a deep swallow from his own glass, draining it completely, then set it on the edge of the table. Facing me, he inhaled slowly. The issue is that Taylor is also planning to have a best man. Right? And? I inclined my head. Why would that? Oh, but then the piece clicked into place, and my spine went rigid. Tony. Cringing, Blake nodded. Yeah. I drained my own wine and gestured for the waiter. Definitely needed more alcohol for this conversation. To my friend, I said, Well, I don't like being around him, but it's been a couple of months. I've moved on. He cocked a brow. Have you? I wanted to get defensive, but I paused and really thought about it before I quietly said, Okay, it still hurts, I won't lie, but it's over, and I'm putting it behind me. If you'd suggested this the same week Tony and I split up, then yeah, I might have had to bow out so he and I didn't kill each other. But I've had some time, and I can handle him, as long as no one's expecting us to dance or be buddy-buddy. I grimaced and added a facetious, or room together on a cruise. That didn't make Blake laugh. Instead, he flicked his eyes away again. My spine straightened. Blake, please tell me you're not making us room together. I can spring from my own room if... No, it's not that. He shook his head. Taylor's family is going to pay for people's accommodations, flights, the works. You don't have to worry about any of that. Okay, that was a relief. Since I wasn't sure I could sell enough organs on the black market to pay for a trip to Honolulu or a 10-day cruise, never mind both. But something was still up, and I didn't like the way my friend wouldn't look at me. What's going on? He moistened his lips. It's, I just figured you deserve to know that Tony will be rooming with someone else. It took a second for the wires to connect. I sat back, hand still firmly on the stem on my wine glass. He's got a new boyfriend. Blake nodded slowly. Yeah, they've been seeing... Anyway, it doesn't matter. We haven't even met him yet. But apparently things are getting serious enough that he's already told Taylor he plans to bring the new guy. So I just thought you should know. Right. Thanks. And I did appreciate the heads up. I was over my stupid ex, but knowing beforehand that he'd have a new man on his arm meant I didn't have to find out the hard way that he'd moved on. Especially after less than 3 months while I was still trying to find my bearings. But I was over him. Completely. Fuck that guy. I cleared my throat, then said breezily, despite feeling anything but, Well, I guess that means I'd better find a +1. If the invitation is for a plus... Oh, of course! Blake waved his hand. Just get me a name at least a week or so in advance so we can put him on the reservations. I nodded, bringing my wine to my lips. Sure, I can do that. How soon are we talking about? June. Is that enough time? He paused. The engagement party will be around then, too. We wanted to give some people who live out of town time to plan, so we're just holding off until... Anyway, May for the party, June for the wedding. May and June. Okay, that gave me about 6 months. I could lock someone down by then, or at least find someone I liked enough to take a vacation together. Right? I took a deep swallow of wine, and as I put the glass down, I met my friend's eyes. 6 months? No problem. Hey, love, can I get the name of your +1? My mother-in-law needs everything for the reservations by the end of the week. I groaned and let my phone tumble onto the bed as I rubbed my eyes. 6 months had seemed like plenty of time to find someone willing to go to fucking Hawaii and on a cruise with me. Now the wedding was 6 weeks away. The engagement party was next Saturday, and I still didn't have someone who thought an all-expenses-paid vacation was enough motivation to stick around. Good God. Was the prospect of dating me really that off-putting? That was a depressing thought. To make matters worse, the ex I was completely over had apparently gotten engaged to his new man. Engaged. So while that asshole would be parading around with a shiny new fiancé on his arm, I couldn't even find someone willing to share a cabin with me and sit together at the reception. What did I have to do? Hire someone? Actually, my gaze slid toward my phone. I mean, my ego didn't like the idea one little bit. Needing to pay someone to pretend he was with me just so my ex-douche friend didn't get to sneer that he was right, and I'd never find someone better than him. Ugh. The alternative, however, was letting him sneer, and I wasn't interested in giving him that satisfaction. So the question was, how much was this going to set me back? And where would I even look? I chewed the inside of my cheek as I stared at my dormant phone. There was already an app on there that I browsed from time to time when loneliness and horniness ganged up on me. The escorts weren't cheap. Yes, I'd looked, even if I'd never actually booked anyone, but I'd heard they were worth every penny. Hadn't I caught a glimpse of something on the app about longer bookings? Where a guy could be hired for a few days or even a few months for whatever reason? Considering how much one-nighters cost, reason number one, I'd only ever browsed, I didn't imagine this would be cheap. Was it really worth it just to show up my ex? I exhaled, letting my head fall back against the headboard. Tony wasn't the only reason I wanted to have someone with me at this wedding. He was the center of it, because he was a smug fuck who'd passive-aggressively remind me at every available opportunity that I was alone, and he wasn't. But there would also be a lot of mutual friends there, and a lot of my friends. People who'd been there for the 6 long years I'd spent under that fucker's thumb. I needed them to know I was okay, and I didn't know any better way to show them than by moving on with another man. They didn't have to know he was a paid stand-in. All they needed to see was Julian Graff, head held high with a hot new man on his elbow, because nothing said I'm over this guy like I'm getting under that one. I picked up my phone and stared at the dark screen. Was I really going to do this? Yeah, I was. I was going to shell out a metric fuckload of money just to show up my ex. That might seem like the stupidest, most reckless, and least rational thing I could possibly do in this scenario, but damn it, I was doing it. Because I would be there for my best friend's wedding. And I didn't think I was strong enough to be there alone. I swallowed hard as embarrassment and nerves and shame and a bajillion other unwelcome emotions tightened my throat. Yes, this was going to cost a pretty penny, but it would be worth it to tell our entire social circle that I was okay. And maybe, when I got home, I could figure out how to actually be okay. Chapter 2. Marco. A few of the other gentlemen, not to mention Anita, the site's owner, had very strong opinions about extended bookings. Some of the guys loved them because they meant steady money for a while, and they frequently meant seriously classy vacations. First-class, 5-star hotels, the works. Others loathed them with the kind of hatred I reserved for root canals and the IRS. Cole, my ex-turned-friend, had worked for Emerald City for a while before meeting his boyfriend, and he'd despised extended bookings, especially the kind that involved accompanying a client on a vacation. Ugh, it's so gross, he'd grumbled after returning from a cruise with a client. Like, it feels like an actual vacation, and it's great, and then he just turns to you and tells you to drop trow. And too bad for you if you're feeling a little seasick or your ears are still jacked up from that morning's scuba excursion. Ugh, fuck that noise. On the other hand, Richie had been all over it. All expenses paid vacation with someone who wants sex, I'm in. So, yeah, mixed reviews. Oddly enough, given that I'd been with Emerald City longer than most, this was my first extended booking. For whatever reason, my clientele had always been in the market for something much more short-term. Until today, that is. According to his profile, his name was Julian. He didn't have any comments from other gentlemen, and his profile was fairly new. He'd booked me for this evening to meet at a swanky restaurant down by the water, with a note that he wanted to discuss details for a longer arrangement. Something about a few local events followed by a cruise. Well, so far, so good. There weren't a lot of pictures on his profile. Barely more than proof of life, really. A couple of fully dressed neck-down shots. From what I could see, he was on the lean side. A tight t-shirt and jeans in one, a dark suit in another. He clearly liked his clothing tailored and snug, and he certainly had the body for it. I didn't like that I couldn't see his face. That wasn't unusual. A lot of guys were paranoid about having face pictures on an app like this. But especially for someone wanting to discuss a lengthy arrangement, I would have liked to see his face. Not because I needed to make sure he was attractive. That wasn't important to me. If a man booked me, he booked me, and his appearance didn't matter. But you could tell a lot about someone by their face, even in photos. Though it wasn't foolproof, there were certain things that came through in pictures. Certain predatory expressions that said, "Marco, you do not want to be alone with this man." Or eyes that said, "Yeah, you saw me on America's Most. Look, Marco, you really do not want to be alone with this man." I know. But I wasn't exactly new to renting out my body, and I'd had a few too many experiences where I should have trusted my judgment and not accepted a client. Once bitten and all that. There was also that small thing about getting a good look at him and making sure I hadn't dated him, fucked him, worked for him, or otherwise crossed paths with him outside of Emerald City. That had happened before, and it was awkward as all hell. And twice bitten, and all that. Anyway, Julian's profile didn't have many helpful photos. The booking for tonight included dining at a restaurant, so, all right. We'd meet in public then. Fine. That was enough to let me feel him out and see if I got a serial killer vibe off him. I confirmed his booking for this evening, then I checked the restaurant's website, and I wasn't at all surprised to find out they had a strict dress code. No jacket, no tie, no service. That wasn't a problem for me. This job had afforded me a nice selection of clothing appropriate for all manner of evening events, from jacket required to black tie formal. I suspected I wasn't the only escort he was considering for his events and upcoming trip. For all intents and purposes, tonight was a job interview, and given that business had been slow lately, I had a vested interest in being the man this Julian decided to hire. The pay from a 2-week extended booking would go a long way toward making up for the fact that, over the last year, my bookings had been steadily drying up. Another gentleman and I had realized I was heading into the dreaded dead zone, where I was older than the 20-somethings but younger than the Silver Foxes, and I just wasn't in demand like I'd been a few short years ago. Or maybe it was just me. Cole insisted I looked good with the gray that was starting to creep in. I thought my clients were happy, but the bookings were just... sigh. So while I quietly scrutinized him for Ted Bundy tells, I'd do my best to impress him enough to hire me for this gig. All right, time to earn 2 weeks in paradise. Driving and parking in downtown Seattle was a nightmare, full stop. In the interest of not being a flustered, irritated mess when I met my potential client, I took an Uber. Good thing, too, the traffic was exceptionally terrible. On top of the tip I put into the app, I gave her a 20 for putting up with the bullshit gridlock. Then I straightened my jacket and walked into the restaurant. At the podium, a young woman smiled at me. "Good evening, sir. Are you dining alone or joining someone?" I returned the smile. "Hi, I'm actually meeting Marco?" A smooth voice stopped me mid-sentence, and I turned to see another man watching me with one eyebrow up. "Julian?" He smiled and extended his hand. "You're right on time." I returned the smile and shook his hand, and I'd give him this much. Julian was definitely not hard on the eyes. He was white, somewhat slim in the shoulders, and about the same height as me, so probably 6'1", 6'2". He had on a gray 3-piece suit that was definitely not off the rack, and though I wasn't usually into guys with long hair, the sun-kissed, shoulder-length look suited him. Nothing about him gave off those star of the next America's Most Wanted vibes, so that was a good start. Well, he glanced at a hellaciously expensive watch. A Jaeger LeCoultre, I thought, and smiled genially. Our reservation isn't for a few minutes, but I think the hostess said our table is ready. Shall we have a seat and get something to drink? Of course. The hostess showed us to a table for two with a panoramic view of Puget Sound from Alki to Elliott Bay. This was probably one of those places people came for dates. With the way the two of us were dressed, people probably thought we were here on a date, which was fine. I'd flown under the radar of Seattle's finest for a long time, and I liked the idea of continuing that trend. Not that there was anything illegal about being an escort until our clothes started coming off, but a man couldn't be too careful. After we'd placed our orders and had some ice water, I met Julian's gaze across the table for two. So I understand you're looking for something extended? I am. Julian rested his forearms against the table and clasped his long fingers together. The short version is that I've been asked to be the best man at a friend's wedding, and what I need is a date for all the pre-wedding festivities here in town, the cruise, and the wedding itself. I nodded slowly. All right, I can do that. Perfect. And I assume we can do better than... He gestured at me, his nose wrinkling a little. I glanced down at myself, then back at him. Brioni isn't sufficient? He looked me up and down, then shook his head. Something a little classier. Is that going to cost me extra? Because I'm fine to pay, I just need to make sure my date looks sharp. Ah, so he was one of those guys. Seriously hot and attractive right up until he opened his damn mouth. Only years of practice kept my expression neutral, and I put on a smile as I said, "We can work it into the price." Truth was, I probably had what he wanted hanging in my closet, and with the amount of money he was going to pay me for this arrangement, I could have bought the suit and just eaten the cost. But if he was going to be a dick about it... Now, Julian shifted in his chair and folded his forearms on the table's edge. The somewhat longer version is that I have no desire to go strolling into this wedding or its other events without a boyfriend. An attractive, successful boyfriend. Oh, this was going to be a shit show, wasn't it? His ex. It had to be his ex. That or his parents. Nobody ever coughed up this much money and was this nitpicky over a date to a wedding unless there was someone they wanted to impress. Usually someone who was going out of their way to be unimpressed. A disappointed mother, a homophobic father, an ex who was... Oh, that could go a number of ways. A nasty ex who'd made the client feel like he couldn't do better. A client who wanted to make an ex jealous. It could really run the gamut, and there was no telling where Julian landed. Not until I'd felt him out a little more. What I had learned from people like him, this would not be my first time attending a wedding as an escort, was that these conversations could be emotional landmines, and my best bet was to let him show his cards in his own time. Still keeping my expression neutral, I said, "All right, if you can get me a list of the events and their dress codes, I'll make sure I have something appropriate for each." That warmed his smile a little. Okay, so he liked the straightforward, business-like approach. Good to know. That most likely meant this was a serious emotional minefield, and he was trying to grab whatever control of the situation he could get. So, Julian watched me. I'm not really familiar with your line of work. How much experience do you have with what I'm looking for? As opposed to... He waved his hand. There weren't words to describe how much restraint it took not to say, "Oh, as opposed to fucking people." If this were a meetup to discuss a one-off engagement like a party or something, I probably would have said it because fuck him. But this was a 2-week-plus booking, and I couldn't afford to turn that away. Not even if the prospect of being on a ship with this guy already had me thinking I'd be less miserable on a Titanic reenactment. So I kept my professional mask in place. Well, they don't call us escorts for nothing. I kept my voice quiet enough to be discreet. I've been to weddings, company parties, even a funeral. Julian blinked. Someone hired an escort to come to a funeral? Are you serious? Nodding, I picked up my water glass. There was some family messiness and, well, the short version is that he was having a hard enough time grieving and he just didn't want to be alone. Julian's lips parted. Oh, wow, He touched his chest. Oh my God, that's so sad. The way he said it didn't sound like he thought it was pathetic on the part of my grieving client. More like he grasped how sad the situation was that someone needed a paid companion so they could get through a funeral. Surprising, given his attitude so far, but definitely a point in his favor. I took a drink. Well, that's the only funeral I've been to, but like I said, weddings, parties. I shrugged as I put down my glass. Sometimes I just stand there and look pretty. Sometimes I'm just a guy's date for an evening, either because he's lonely and wants to go out with someone, or because he's going to an event and doesn't want to go alone. I guess that's the common thread. I provide company to men who don't want to be alone. The details just depend on the situation and on what he wants. Julian nodded. And how do you navigate when people ask questions about you? What you do for a living, things like that? We work that out ahead of time. It's not uncommon for me to say my job is something that either nobody will know enough about to tell if I'm bullshitting the details, or they won't care. Such as, it depends. A lot of times the client will know what his peers or family will ask questions about, and will pick a job for me that warrants, oh, that's interesting, and no follow-up. At an event with artists and musicians, I'm not going to run into too many people who are deeply fascinated by the finer points of accounting or engineering. So you just pick something that won't get a lot of questions. He didn't sound thrilled by that. If the situation calls for it, and if it doesn't, he tilted his head. If people do want to know what you do, then the client and I have an established dossier ahead of time. I've even had fake business cards made with a number that goes to a dummy voicemail, or even to someone who's agreed to be my, I made air quotes, colleague or boss. Oh, so you do come prepared then? As prepared as the client wants me to be, yes. He studied me and his eyes narrowed a little. Has anyone ever, caught on? Figured out you were an escort? I thought for a moment about the best way to answer that. I've had the odd person start grilling me because they thought I was making something up. No one's ever suspected I was an escort, though. Because they thought you were making something up? Julian absently swirled his water like wine. How so? Something I said didn't jive with something they saw on the internet. They know someone in the same business who said something slightly different, so clearly I was but I was lying. I shrugged. We've all run into the know-it-all types, and the people who think anyone who contradicts their worldview must be a liar. In this line of work, I definitely run into them. And how do you handle it? I thought about that too. Because, much like in the scenarios we were discussing, I had the distinct feeling every word I said was being scrutinized way more than it needed to be. I usually follow the client's lead. Most of the time they'll catch on, step in, and redirect the conversation. If they don't, or if they're not right there, then I'll keep my story going until they either give up or call me out. Julian inclined his head. What happens if they call you out? Like everything, it depends on the situation. I've told one person, I'm sorry you don't believe me, but it's the truth, and they rolled their eyes and walked away. In one case, I pulled the person aside and admitted I didn't actually work in that field yet, but I was looking for a job and just didn't want to embarrass my date by letting people think he was seeing a bum. What did they say to that? They actually respected it, which I kind of figured they would. I wouldn't have told them that if I didn't think it would work. What made you think it would? You get really good at reading people in this line of work. I see. He held my gaze. And no one has ever caught on to what you really do? He managed not to wrinkle his nose as he said it, but I had a feeling it was a struggle. Just like it was a struggle for me not to roll my eyes. No, I said evenly. No one has ever suspected a thing. Good. Because people are definitely going to ask what you do, and I really don't want them knowing your real job. He folded his hands on the edge of the table. So I suppose we should get our story straight? You look down your nose at me again, and I'll tell people I turn tricks. But I kept that placid expression firmly in place. I have a handful of pre-designed profiles. His eyebrows rose. Do you? Oh, yeah. I always get asked what I do, so I have to be prepared. I see. He shifted a little, resting his forearm on the table and absently playing with his fork. A nervous thing, I suspected, which made me wonder if his arrogant bullshit was a defense mechanism. It was still annoying, but maybe it was just a prickly exoskeleton over the top of a very soft, sensitive interior. That especially made sense after he'd lifted the veil slightly to express sympathy about the client I'd accompanied to a funeral. He tilted his head. What, profiles do you have? I pulled off artist, actor. His lips quirked as if I were reading from a list of worst possible options. I cleared my throat and tried a different direction. I really do have an engineering degree, so that's an obvious pick. There was that nose wrinkle again. Figures. He was an elitist fuck who wanted someone a bit more prestigious than a lowly engineer. Somehow, keeping my annoyance out of my voice, I said, alternatively, I can sound like I know what I'm talking about with medicine, cryptocurrency, stocks. There isn't a lot of time to prepare, but I can make any of those things work enough to sound convincing off the cuff. His lips quirked. Medicine is always a winner. Stocks and crypto, too. But my ex is a hedge fund manager. Julian grimaced. He can also smell bullshit from a mile away. Ah, there it is. An ex. I wonder if he's as charming as you are. I carefully tamped all that down, though. Whether I liked his attitude or not, I suspected he was deploying an entire arsenal of defense mechanisms right now. If I had to guess, he had a whole lot of feelings about attending all these events with his ex, and if his ex could, as Julian had said, smell bullshit from a mile away, then this was someone whose opinion Julian deeply valued. More and more, my money was on this ex being someone who'd made Julian feel like he couldn't and wouldn't do better. It was also still possible Julian just wanted a man he could smugly parade in front of the ex to make him jealous. Or both. And I get to be right in the middle. Ugh, do I really need this money? I sipped my drink before I quietly asked, do you think medicine will convince him then? Oh, definitely. Julian paused. Though make sure you do know your stuff. Tony is one of those types who believes Big Pharma deliberately keeps us all sick in order to sell us medicine, so... I was holding on to my professionalism by my fingertips, and I very nearly rolled my eyes. Ah, so he counters peer-reviewed research with whatever quackery he's found online. Bingo. So, if you're prepared for that, then... He nodded sharply. A medical career could fly, but if you'd rather not set yourself up to debate the role of vaccines and causing autism with someone who's had a few whiskey sours... I couldn't hold back the eye roll this time, but I figured I could get away with it since it was directed at Julian's ex. Jesus, he's one of those. Oh, especially when he's drunk, yes. And I assure you, he will be. I thought about it, then chuckled. Would it be too antagonistic to show up as a sales rep for a pharmaceutical company? Julian laughed aloud, and I was not expecting the zing of, wow, you're pretty, when he let loose that unrestrained amusement. He really was putting up defenses, wasn't he? Locking his emotions about this ex behind a snotty exterior. What did this guy do to you? Julian quickly collected himself, though he was still grinning. I kind of want to dare you to do that, just so I can see his head explode, but... His grin faded, and he sighed as he stared into his drink. Shoulders sinking, he met my gaze again. Oh, I don't want to turn my best friend's wedding into battle royale. I just don't want to be there alone when my ex shows up with his new fiancée. Ah, called it. So, just a job that will convince people I'm not blowing smoke, I said. A little more subdued now, Julian nodded. Yeah. Steer clear of anything financial and maybe don't push the pharmaceutical buttons. What about something generic? I asked. A general manager of... No, something with some... He pursed his lips and gestured like he was struggling to find the word. Prestige. Another eye roll almost got away from me, but I was damn good at restraining myself. I still couldn't decide if Julian was trying to use me as a shield from his ex's sneers or if he was trying to make the ex jealous. I wondered if he knew. Well, I smiled genially and, I hoped, believably. There's a little time to nail down a profile. That's true, but we shouldn't let the grass grow. He shifted in his seat, folding his hands on the edge of the table. I suppose I should tell you a bit more about the festivities then. So, that's the situation. Julian slid his hands into his pockets as we stepped out in front of the restaurant. Do we have a deal? Well, ideally, this was something I'd want to sleep on. He was asking me to commit to 2 weeks and some change of being front and center in a volatile situation between a couple of contentious exes. That wasn't for the faint of heart. On the other hand, I could deal with it, and it was better me than some of the other guys at Emerald City. None of them were wilting violets by any means, but I didn't think any of them needed to be subjected to the shit that would come their way if they took this job. I didn't either, but I did need the money. So I nodded. Yeah, I'm in. Just message me with the dates and dress codes. Julian smiled, looking more relieved than he'd probably intended to let on. Extending his hand, he said, We'll be in touch. I smiled back and shook it. And then he was gone. He headed away from the waterfront, probably toward one of the parking garages that had valet service, and I walked south until I was sure he couldn't see me anymore. Then I summoned an Uber. While I waited for the car, I gazed out at Puget Sound. The lights of the city glittered on the water, and there was a ferry making its way between some cargo ships that were probably waiting their turn to enter the port of Seattle. The night was as quiet and peaceful as they ever were in this town. Not that the view did much to relax me as I ran through everything I'd discussed with Julian and everything I'd just signed up for. I swore this situation felt like two men who used to show dogs together, and now that they were going to be facing off in the ring for the first time, they were each determined to find the perfect pooch to utterly destroy the other. Part of me wanted to grab them each by the scruffs, shove them into a room, and tell them to sort their shit out. The other part of me wanted to help Julian get absolutely hammered until all his feelings came pouring out, and he finally realized that if someone made him this miserable, maybe that guy's opinion wasn't worth a damn. But I wasn't getting paid to be Julian's life coach. And I wasn't in this to counsel the couple or to show him the light. I was here to be the dog that won Best in Show and made the client's ex feel like shit. And no, I absolutely did not like that. The bottom line, however, was that until I started piquing the interest of the crowd who liked silver foxes or something, I couldn't afford to turn down Julian's offer of an extended booking. My landlord didn't care how I felt about inserting myself as cannon fodder between a couple of dueling exes. She just wanted the rent paid, and my first client in almost a month really pissed me off wasn't an excuse to not pay her. So, fine. I didn't have to like the job, why he'd hired me, or what I'd be doing. I just had to do it, take the money, and move on with my life. It was only 2 weeks, plus a smattering of events between now and when we'd be leaving for Hawaii. I could do this. And I couldn't lie, as much as Julian irritated me, I honestly did feel sorry for him. How much did a man have to fuck up someone's head for him to feel like he needed to go to these lengths and pay that much money just to throw it in the guy's face that he'd moved on? Well, it was none of my business. I was there to do a job and play a role. I didn't know exactly why I'd been pulled into this or what Julian hoped to accomplish, and I didn't need to know. One thing I was pretty damn sure of, though. This was going to be the longest 10-day cruise ever.